Alright guys, so we're back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. Obviously today we are covering the latest episode of Inside Final Fantasy VII Remake that they dropped today about the story and characters. So I'm not really sure why they decided to drop it on Tuesday when the last one was on Monday, I don't really know. But of course, before we hop into that, a couple of smaller bits of info, and I cannot even believe that I'm talking about this again, but the goddamn Butterfinger DLC codes. This shit is plaguing my existence and just somehow keeps popping back up on my channel. But the only reason we're talking about it today is right before I started making this video, I actually had somebody comment on a video from almost 2 weeks ago and said that they actually got some codes today. And they submitted the receipt last Thursday, which is super recent. That's like 5 days ago. So if you happen to still have the picture of your receipt and never got approved, maybe resubmit it. Or if you have been approved but never got your codes, maybe just contact customer support. But just keep checking your emails because you might still be getting codes. Another bit of news is that World Preview book that we talked about a few times is currently available for pre-order. So if that's something you've been wanting, again, this is like 99.9% certain, like only covering the first game. You're not going to get the actual World Preview as it seems to imply. And it's not coming out for us until September, so there's really no reason you have to buy it now. But if you have the extra money and that's something you're wanting as like a collector's item, it is available. The other bit of news, which doesn't necessarily pertain to everybody, but it could in the near future, is that I got informed yesterday in one of my videos that the UK is currently under lockdown, and it's actually going on for like 3 weeks, which I think it's going up to April 13th. And obviously that puts the lockdown past the launch of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is coming out on April 10th. Now, I don't know for sure if this like affects mail service. I don't know if that's like an essential thing where you're still going to be receiving mail. So if you happen to like order a physical copy of the game on Amazon, you might still receive it on the 10th. Y'all would know that more than I would. I'm not from the UK. But something I was thinking of that's kind of interesting, this will be good for everybody in case your city goes on lockdown or whatever, is that they say you can still go to the store for essentials. They say that in my state too. My state's currently about to go on lockdown the next couple of days as well. You can still go to like the store for essentials, like grocery shopping. But something like Walmart, for example, sells food, but they also sell clothes and electronics and things like that. And obviously, they sell video games. So what's to stop me from going, when there's a lockdown, to Walmart to grocery shop, but also maybe picking up a physical copy of the game if they have it in stock? When you really think about it, a lockdown's not actually affecting the launch of this game that much, assuming that you have something like a Walmart in your state or your country. Also assuming that those places are going to be open on April 10th, but I do think they're essential businesses because they kind of sell everything. And look, I know we've talked about this a lot on the channel, but I've been trying to prep you guys for this for a long time. I still think the best option for you is to buy a digital copy. Anyways, on to the main part of the video where we look at the new episode of Inside Final Fantasy VII Remake, where they cover the characters and the story. So near the beginning of the video, Katase talks about how he actually played the original Final Fantasy VII before they started working on the remake, which makes a lot of sense. You assume most of them would, and most of them probably did. There is one guy who chose not to, which I found kind of interesting. What I found interesting from Katase's part is where he talks about how surprised he was with how short the Midgar segment was in the original game. And that's like a sentiment for a lot of players out there. There's a lot of people's concerns with this game being Midgar only is that, you know, the Midgar segment was pretty short. But Katase mentions how it takes about 7 to 8 hours to complete the Midgar segment, which is actually more accurate. In the last video, for some reason, Nomura actually says that it takes around 10 hours, which is a lot more time than most people would do it in. But the point of Katase's part is he talks about how it felt like the Midgar segment was a lot longer back in the day when you played it, but now when you play it, it's actually a lot shorter than you realize, and I can relate to that. When I was at a younger age, it always felt like the escape from Midgar like took a long time, and it probably did because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but like it seemed like doing the first couple bombing missions, the wall market stuff, Aerith getting kidnapped, going to the Shinra building, like all that felt like it took forever at a younger age, but it's actually pretty short. So pretty much he says with the remake that he wants players to experience Midgar how he remembers it, as in taking a long time to complete, which is why it's, you know, a full game. And then for some reason at about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, they play like a 2-minute segment from the first video where they talk about like Midgar being a colossal city, taking like 30 years to build. And the only reason I know that is for one, I can reference the original video, but also that last Inside the Final Fantasy VII Remake video was where I first learned that it took them like 30 years to make Midgar. It was just kind of strange. The video in the background is different, but what they're saying is exactly the same. I don't know why they did that. So from here they start talking about the characters, and they start with Cloud, of course, and talk about how with the remake they're going to dive deeper into the psychology of Cloud, because he's a very complex character. Like a lot of people who maybe know him from other games, something like Kingdom Hearts, Dissidia, whatever, they know him as like the main character, the hero from Final Fantasy VII, but he does have a very complex backstory, he has a very deep backstory. And I love that they're sticking to that. Like, Cloud, again, has a dark story. Final Fantasy VII as a whole has a pretty damn dark story. It was a quirky, weird 90s game at times, or a lot of times, really. But it does have a very serious story, and they seem to be sticking with that. Nojima then goes on to explain how in the original game, Cloud was kind of a cool, stylish character, but how in this game, that facade can slip. It's a front he puts up to try to be cool around other people and for people to respect him. And you actually get a glimpse of this with the demo, whenever one of the Shinra guards says it's over, and Cloud goes, "That's my line."
It's over!
That's my line.
See, to Cloud, that's probably like a badass line, or what he thinks a badass person would say, or a cool guy, or something like that. But whenever I first played the demo and Cloud said that, I actually thought it was a bit cringy, and it's so funny that Nojima actually mentions that in this video. From here, they go on to talk about Tifa and then Barrett, but nothing really stuck out to me as like new information. That Tifa's kind of torn on getting revenge. Barrett, this crazy over-the-top leader of Avalanche. Nothing that was really new information. The Aerith stuff is where it gets pretty interesting and a bit spoilery, so if you don't want to know, click away from the video. But they talk about how they have a past that they can't talk about here, and I'm assuming they mean the stuff with Professor Gast and Ifalna. When Aerith was like experimented on as a child, and then also like Ifalna and Aerith eventually escaping to the Sector 7 slums where she died, and the woman who's her mother in Final Fantasy 7, I cannot remember her name right now, kind of like takes her in. But they actually say that in the remake, they're going to reveal a major untold part of her past, which has me very, very curious. Nojima also just throws out the line that Aerith really values just being alive, which, just entirely hurts my soul. They then go on to talk about Aerith having special powers, which is obviously because she's a Cetra, she's connected to the planet, and we get a little bit more of the scene of Song going to kidnap her. What I found interesting is if you look into the background, you can actually see that there's a building on fire, so it seems like they're very serious about getting Aerith. They're willing to destroy Sector 5. They then talk about Jesse, Biggs, and Wes, which is good that we're getting more time with those characters in this game. They're getting more character development, but again, nothing new. And the same goes for Sephiroth. They talk about Sephiroth, but it's not anything we don't already know. They then talk about Shinra for a bit, which again, nothing super new, but we do get some cool concept art that we have not seen before. But the main thing that stuck out for me is that the Shinra Corporation was actually built in a single generation, which I don't know if that's information we've known before, but for me it seems new. Nojima also points out that whenever he learned they were remaking Final Fantasy VII, he asked if he could change the dialogue, because the dialogue in the original game was meant to be read, right? Like, you're supposed to read, it's text-based. Nowadays, obviously, a modern game isn't like that. There's voice acting, there are realistic-looking characters, it's a realistic-looking world. He also says they went back and wrote in all the things that were omitted from the original game, because they had much more simpler characters, again, also text-based, so every character across the board should have a lot better dialogue. But they're also sure to point out that all the character dialogue and conversations that were iconic from the original game are still intact. They made sure to keep that stuff in there. Toriyama points out what he thinks is the hardest thing for them to recreate was the internal monologue that Cloud used to have with himself in the original game, where the screen would go black and you would just see text. Like, they didn't explain how they're handling it in the remake. And he says that they tried to find a new way of depicting that, where it kind of kept it as mysterious as it was in the original game, and he thinks that they have achieved that. I'm very curious how they're going to handle it. I really want to see that. Toriyama also points out that in terms of the story, it's super faithful to the original, which isn't really a surprise. They're not going to change anything major. And also says that while the main story is still the same, there's a lot of new scenes added in between the main parts of the original game's story, which is what I'm excited about. Like, I'm here to replay the original game again, of course, in much better quality graphics and stuff and voice acting, but I'm also very, very excited for new stuff. An example they give is that Tifa actually shows Cloud a flat or an apartment, essentially, and that they both end up living in the same building, which is something obviously entirely new. And it got me wondering about that apartment thing, is that going to be something like a safe house or a home base, or we're going to keep coming back to it? I'm assuming it's going to be in the Sector 7 slums, and that's where all of Avalanche live. I'm just wondering if this flat that Cloud lives in is something we can keep coming back to, maybe like a save location or some shit. So something I mentioned earlier is how Kitase and a lot of the staff actually replayed Final Fantasy VII to kind of prep for making the remake, but Toriyama actually talks about how he actually chose not to. He had a hand in developing the original game, and what he wanted to do instead was try to recreate that feeling he had back then when he was making the game, instead of how the game makes him feel now, which I think in its own way is actually pretty genius. And the last thing I take note of is Kitase talking about how obviously there's new things and surprises that were not in the original, but also that there's things that people wanted them to show. And to be honest, I don't really know what this could be in reference to, other than maybe things that were sort of hinted at and vague in the original, or potentially like cut content stuff that people wanted to see. So it could be a few things. I think the thing that makes the most sense, of course, is things that were talked about and hinted at in the original, but not actually shown, that they might be willing to show now with the remake. It's another kind of longer video. We've had a few of these recently, but when they put out a bunch of screenshots in an interview that we got to break down, and these longer videos, they're like 16 and 20 minutes long, like, you can't make the video short. It's like impossible. So as always, we can talk about whatever you want to. It's a long video. We went over a lot of different things. But the question I want to leave the video on is, what do you think Kitase is referencing here at the end of the video? What do you think he's talking about when he says things that people wanted them to show? As always, leave your thoughts and more in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to see more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid, at my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Forever for a while, give me forever for a while. Quit acting like a baby, or at least less like a child. Give me serenity, or at least just be